idea. I don't know. I mean, other people might say, well, I didn't know I could get, I didn't know there was public comment on Friday night and if we let someone in, but then again, maybe just accessibility should be the default. I'm okay either way.
I personally think we should just stick with whatever we published in the notice so that people aren't confused.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too, Bill. Thank you. And Mary. So let's do that. And people can always come and give public comment on Monday night at our regular meeting if there's something they wanted to share with us regarding goal setting. A public comment then as well. So, all right, it's 4:02. Do you want me to call the meeting to order? Do we have everybody? Everyone's here, Kathy? Not expecting Tim or... Okay, sounds good. So I would like to call to order the April 2nd, 2021 goal setting session for the West Linn City Council. Let's take the roll. I'm Jules Walters, Mayor. Council President Relier.
Present.
Councilor Bielostowski.
Present.
Councilor Jones.
Present, and I do want to flag the fact that there's someone behind Kathy Molesky listening in.
Councilor Baumgardner.
Present.
And we have City Manager Jerry Gabrielatos.
Present.
Recorder Kathy Molesky.
Present.
To the City Manager Dylan Digby.
Present.
We have our two guests here today, our facilitators for our goal setting session, Miss Jen Gray O'Connor.
Hello.
And Mr. Zachary Johnson.
Hello.
And welcome everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I think this is a great opportunity for us as a newly formed council to really reflect on what's important to us moving forward in the future and how we would like to continue to serve the community in the best way possible. And I know that all the council members have been working hard, really reflecting on what the goal setting session means to them. So I am very excited. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen. Is it okay if I call you Jen? Is that okay? Okay, excellent. So I'll turn it over to you to begin the meeting, and you can sort of guide us through your agenda. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, we're very excited to be meeting with you. When we had the opportunity to talk with you all individually, we were really struck by the generosity and the enthusiasm going into this process. It all seems like you all work very well together thus far and are excited about thinking about the future. And so we're very excited to be facilitating here with you today. I think what might be the best step is for us to give you an overview of the agenda over the next couple days, and then we'll do some more lengthy introductions to give you each the opportunity to give us a little more information about what you're thinking about, how you're coming into this space, what's on your mind, and then we'll go through some of our sort of pro forma parts to our agenda. So Zach, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, we'll just take a peek at our agenda.
Yeah, can I get that permission? It looks like it's not letting me do it right now.
I have a quick process question to Kathy. Do we need to approve the agenda officially with a motion?
You certainly can if you want to.
Council President, would you like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I move that we approve the agenda as posted.
I second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as posted. Kathy, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Council President Relier?
Yes.
Councilor Baumgardner?
Yes.
Councilor Bielostowski?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Mayor Walters?
Yes. Thank you very much. So we've approved the agenda for this goal setting session. And now I'm ready for Zach to share his screen with us.
All right. Okay, so this is just our agenda for Friday first. So we're going to start with introductions and an orientation. Just going to overview what we're doing for the next 2 days. After that, we're going to move into community agreements. These are just process ground rules about how we'll interact, just so that we can make sure there's a positive process that everyone can feel comfortable participating in. After that, we will move into an overview of the technology we're using, answer any questions about that, and talk about the process tomorrow and how that will work with the technology we're using. And then we'll close out today with a discussion about equity and how we want to be keeping equity in mind as we approach the goals that we're making. Tomorrow is when we get into more of the goal setting, the meat of the goal setting. If you saw our proposal, we were using this appreciative inquiry model. So that's where we're starting with discovering, appreciating the best of what is, what we need to work on, what is currently in place. Moving on to dreaming about ideally what would our goals be, what do we want to achieve as a council, what do we want to achieve during our terms. Finally, moving on to design about how do we take those goals and implement them? What are the specific sort of initiatives, ideas we have about how to reach those goals? And then ending with destiny, which is really, we have these goals, we have these initiatives. How are we going to make sure that we're following through on this? How are we going to check back throughout the year and make sure that we're keeping these in mind and honoring the work we did here at this goal setting session? And just in terms of what the time breakdown for that looks like tomorrow, we'll start with the public comment like we were talking about, then move into the staff review where we'll have some brief staff presentations. We wanted the majority of this time to be devoted to you as counselors talking to each other and really workshopping those goals. So there's limited staff time, but we recognize that the document at the end of this will be a draft document. There'll be time to talk to staff about it, get clarifications, and modify it before you approve it at a later date. Then we'll take a break, move on to dreaming, which is where we're going to get into those goals, create a list of goals that there's consensus for. Then we'll take a lunch break, reconvene, and then finally, like I was talking about, really come up with those initiatives and do the wrap up and next steps. So that's the agenda for the next 2 days. Any questions about the agenda? Nothing? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Jen to facilitate the introductions.
Okay, terrific. And just to orient you to this process, as you know, the council does an annual or biannual goal setting process, and the whole process in the past has been guided by 5 principles that were identified in a visioning document. I think the last time was updated in 2008, but it has been a document that has guided this process throughout. And so we'll start with that as our frame, and then you all will revisit the previous goals, either amend or edit or decide on new goals. And then we will go back in the afternoon and really look at what are the initiatives that you're interested in and how are we going to know that we're successful in those initiatives. And throughout that, we want to make sure that we're having a discussion about equity and really centering any of the goals on an equity framework. And so this evening, that'll be some of our discussion. It'll just be step 1 in the process for really thinking about having an equity framework, but this will at least get us started in making sure that that's part of the goals discussion. We thought it would be really generative, though, just to hear at length a little bit from each of you, just an introduction to who you are, what things you're bringing to the table already, what ideas about West Linn, what are the initiatives or the things that are really passionate about you. And I think we sent Zach just a general question of what do you appreciate most about West Linn, or what to you is the best thing about West Linn, because we're really going to start with the what is and what is positive about the place that we're in. So why don't I start with maybe also as part of the introduction, if you could let us know how you like to be addressed, whatever is comfortable for you. So Mayor, do you mind starting us off, and then let us know how you like to be addressed, what you're coming to the table with, and then what you most appreciate about West Linn.
Thank you so much. However you want to address me, if you're comfortable with Mayor, that's fine. You'll be surprised what I get called all sorts of different things. Miss Jules is one that I've been getting lately. I'm not sure why. And let's see, I I moved here in 2007 I have 4 kids. At the time I had 3, now I have 4. And we chose West Linn to settle in because it was so beautiful on the river with lots of beautiful open park spaces, playgrounds, places to explore. Um, I always tell the story about the first day we looked at the house that we ended up buying, our first house here. The kids were little, and a little girl next door was playing on her swing, and my girls ran outside, and the 4 of them ran up and down the block and played with all the other neighborhood kids for the afternoon. In fact, we had to wait for them to finish playing before we left. So it just really reminded me a lot of what it was like growing up back in the day in the 70s when I was a kid, and just how welcoming it felt, and what a great place it was to raise our family. And it's still much that for me today. I realize there's some definite work we have to do to make sure that everybody feels that same level of safety and feeling welcome. But I know that it's been a very difficult year, and what I've appreciated most in the last year is watching how much time and intentional effort people take in this city to take care of each other, to reach out to neighbors, to reach out to friends, and thank the city for the work they've been doing, repair from the ice storm, checking on neighbors. And those are in the hard times. And the good times, you still see people out there volunteering in our parks, visiting with each other in their neighborhoods. It's a really special place. So I just feel very fortunate that I have the opportunity to serve the community in this way. And so I'm just looking forward to having a new, fresh set of ideas and goals for the city. I think we're in a great place to really look towards the future, and start really moving forward. And I'm really excited about the council we have and what ideas they're going to bring to the table. So thank you.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. And maybe just so we can keep going, if you want to just nominate the next person to go, and then we'll just keep going that way.
Or how about Councillor Jones?
Thank you. And hello to you all. So my wife and I moved here in 1998, to be quite honest, for the same reason a lot of people do, for schools. I had started teaching at what was Bolton Middle School before it became Rosemont Ridge Middle School. I began in 1996, and 2 years later, we had our first child, and we realized that this was a community that we wanted to raise our kids in. So we were in the Bolton neighborhood for 4 years down on River Street, down at the bottom of the hill. And then we took a little detour to my wife's home state, North Carolina, for a year, and decided we missed Oregon. So we hightailed it back here and moved into the home we're in now, which is behind one of the softball fields down at Willamette Park. And up until now, I had never lived in one place in my life more than 4 years. And we've now been here for 18. So I've never been someplace long enough that I have to do things like replace the furnace and fix the roof, but I'm now rooted and I get to do all those things. So. But our kids were raised right here, attended all these schools, and they're back east now, college graduates and a college graduate about to be. So my wife, Chrissy, and I both work in the Westland-Wilsonville School District. I teach at Westland High School. And my wife, Chrissy, is a physical therapist. When we met, she worked at Providence Hospital, but she's now a school-based physical therapist working with kids with physical disabilities, just helping them access their education and be successful in school. And we're both privileged and honored to be working here. Speaking of which, I am honored to be here with you today. I'm only an interim city councilor, and though I'm only here formally for the next 2 months, I'm very grateful to be a part of this process with you today. As to the question of what I bring to the table, I guess what I want to point out is some value terms, if you will, that I think represent my vision for what I hope to work with you to establish here in our community. And those 4 value terms are safe and inclusive and livable and thriving. And in my head, friends, that's the basis from which everything I look at the city stems from. Are we ensuring that this is a place where all people feel safe? Are we ensuring that this is a place where all feel they're a part of this community and they feel included? Is this a place, and I know it's a cliche term to say livable, but I actually did some research into the term, and even though it's kind of lost some meaning, to me, it still has a great deal of value. Livable in a sense that this is a place where people are comfortable living and where they can live happily and successfully. And then the fourth one being thriving really stems from my notion that, you know, all living things, they're moving one direction or another, friends. They're either growing or they're declining. And don't misread the term growth, friends. I don't mean developing, but I mean evolving and changing in good ways, which can mean protecting as much as anything else. So those are the four things that are in the back of my mind this entire time, and they're the four things that were in my head when I opted to apply for the position. As for what I appreciate, a host of things popped in my head, but I'll just share the very first thing that popped into my head. And that is the reason that Chrissy and I came here, because of what this community does for kids and how much it values kids. Whether it's our schools or our programs, whether they're school-based programs or community-based programs, our parks, our activities, this is a marvelous place to have a family. And I really appreciate that about West End. Honored to be with you today. Thank you.
And then Todd, who do you want to bounce it to next?
We're popcorning, as we call it in school. All right. Mary Baumgartner, please.
Thank you. I'm happy to be called Mary. I think we can be informal, but and she, her pronouns. I grew up in West Linn on a farm, and I was kind of a little bit of an outlier in more than one way because I went to middle school in Bolton in town rather than the middle school in Willamette for reasons of logistics of my parents basically driving us from, we had to drive anyway because we were a little bit further out. And so I've seen West Linn change a lot in 54 years and have had some interesting experiences getting to know farmers and urban, suburban dwellers and all the different interests and focuses and priorities that different people have. I went to West Linn schools and state colleges, and my kids used to kind of tease me because everywhere I'd go, I'd run into someone I knew because I lived where I grew up and went to both U of O and Oregon State. So they used to say I should run for office. So that was the joke, and look at me now. So I've always wanted to give back to my community. It's just kind of been my natural bent from when I was in high school, and I wanted to get involved in leadership. And not necessarily because I feel like I'm better than other people or know more, but I'm fascinated by people and their perspectives and listening and having empathy. That's probably also what drew me to work in schools with special needs students. From when my children were pretty young, I just was volunteering in the school, and then I thought, well, maybe I could just get paid to do this. So I got a job with the school district and worked up until a couple of years ago, the last 5 years in West Linn High School with special needs students. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to represent the community of West Linn. I am very passionate about environmentalism and sustainability, and spent the last year and a half as doing a lot of environmental activism work and organizing with some local nonprofits around changing from our fossil fuel-based infrastructure and reducing our carbon emissions, ideally, we kind of all switched gears to social justice activism last June. And so I've become more aware of that, especially with the police issues that our community had and listening to the community's concerns. I'm hoping that together we can make a real difference about regaining trust and having a community that everyone feels safe and everyone feels welcome. Because I get kind of hung up when I hear safe a little bit, because that can be a fraught term in my personal opinion. Because safe for some of us means unsafe for some others. And being a privileged person, I'm very aware of that. And I don't think it has to mean that, but I'm afraid it does if we're not intentional about it. And as far as West Linn, I would say we have a strong sense of community. And I'm hoping we can capitalize on that and work together to make an even better West Linn going forward. And I'm really excited to work with my fellow council members doing that. So how about Rory?
Thank you. And yes, Jen and Zach, you can call me Rory. Let's see. I ran for office in November of last year. I served for the next 4 years. I grown up in West Linn myself as well, just like Mary. I moved here in 2005 with my parents. I was 5 years old when I moved here, and I'm 21. I go to Lewis and Clark College studying international affairs. I really bring a perspective of wanting to work together and valuing relationships. You know, I'm really just thrilled to be working with my fellow counselors, mayor, and the staff. I think we have a really great team here, and I'm just excited to move forward and get to work this year. And in terms of what I appreciate, I really like our local businesses, restaurants, the residents, and especially our parks. I go to Fields Bridge Park near my house. That's my main one, but I really have enjoyed going out to the city and going to parks. And I think a lot of people as well appreciate that. But I didn't have a really prepared statement, but I just feel glad to be here, honored to represent the citizens, and honored to just be able to be a change agent and move the city forward and work together. And I'll go to Council President Relier.
Yeah, thank you, guys. I'm not sure what the 4 questions are. I had to, right at the beginning of this session, jump outside for a minute because I had a neighbor whose car was in a rather unsafe situation. They had the car jacked up in a driveway that's on a steep slope, and when they took the tire off, the tire was flat. And when you have to put that tire back on, it causes both rear wheels to come off the ground, and there's a high potential for the car to start rolling down the driveway at that point. And even with the wheels chalked, once the emergency brakes are no longer functioning, the car has a tendency to want to roll down the street on the jack and then out into the street, and potentially anybody coming down the street or any pedestrians using the driveway or the sidewalk could get run over. So I had to run out real quick and help with that situation. So I apologize for that. So if you could let me know what we're doing at this point, that would be appreciated.
Sure, we're just asking you to introduce yourself. What would you prefer us to call you? What kind of issues or things are you bringing to the table, issues that are sort of already on your mind? And then our introductory question is just, what do you appreciate about Linn?
Okay.
Sounds like you're muted.
Sorry, I must have gone from mute to unmute, back to mute again. So I like to be called Bill, and the primary thing on my plate is land use planning, construction, livability through planned construction rather than just urban sprawl. And I've been involved mostly with construction and emergency management planning at the federal and state level most of my life. And so I'd like to assist the community in working through those processes that affect public administration and our ability to serve the community at the highest level we can with the limited amount of resources that we have. So that's kind of it for Bill.
Great. And then Jerry, since you're joining us in the process too, do you mind just giving us a real brief introduction?
I like being called Jerry. I've been in Westland for about 6 months. I'm thrilled to be here. Part of the reason I got into this work in general, and I don't know if I've shared this one with the council, but I used to go to these parties in Chicago and they were all based on this theme that cities are mankind's greatest invention. And that has stuck with me. And so the work that I do is the work that I love. And I referenced this when I was interviewing for the job, that the goals that were set by the council before were ones that I thought my skill set matched up well with. So environment and sustainability, hello, Council Baumgartner, and community engagement. And, I came from a city not that long ago with 42 parks, Rory. So 42 parks in a town of 18,000. So I thought I had a skill set that matched pretty well with what some of the needs were here. And I'm thrilled to be here. Every day is better than the last.
Great. So we've already been I've watched you all utilize, so I feel like we're all pretty technically proficient, but Zach's just going to run us through, we'll be using a Google Jamboard, and then just sort of our protocols of how, we'll vote and how we use this technology.
Hello. So first of all, just if there's ever a technical issue during this meeting, feel free to stop us and we'll try to troubleshoot it. We want everyone to feel comfortable participating and not have any issues. Tomorrow, when we're doing the big discussion about goals and initiatives that fall under those goals, I will be using Google Jamboard. So y'all will be doing the talking and decision making, and then I am going to put it up on, let me pull it up real quick.
Okay, while Zach's looking for it, just to orient you to it, if we were in person, we would have giant boards and then we would be using sticky notes to do this. So this is the best electronic version of that kind of workshop.
Yeah, so this is just an example page. So sort of an issue area up top. And then these are just these are old goals that we'll see if they're still relevant tomorrow. But goals will go there in yellow. And then underneath that, we'll have another color sticky note with the initiatives that we think fall under that goal, how we get there. So this is just a great way to keep track visually of what we're talking about. At the end of the meeting, we'll export this as a PDF that will be available for you to review, and it will help inform the final document as well. So that's Jamboard. And then so any questions about technology?
I have a question.
Yeah.
The text is very small. Is it just my eyes, my bad eyes? These are my best glasses, so.
We will zoom in on when we're actually doing the
Okay.
note taking. I'll zoom in on individual notes and we'll be moving things around. Yeah, that's just sort of the broad overview of what it looks like. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions about that? Okay. So moving on, the next part of our agenda for this evening is community agreements. So these are just basically ground rules for how we'll interact with each other, how we'll be good participants in this process, and how we can make sure everyone's comfortable and engaged. We normally come with 5 introductory ones, example ones. And then I'll ask y'all if you would like to change them or add to them. But this is just the list that we use as standard practice. First is listen to understand, not just to reply. This is really about active listening, taking time to really hear what someone is saying, and not feeling the need to jump in right away. It's okay if we have a little bit of silence as we're processing what people are saying, as long as we're really understanding where they're coming from. Next, we have speak honestly and with respect. We want everyone to feel respected and feel that they are able to speak their honest opinions in this process. Next, make space for multiple perspectives. The goal is certainly to have lots of consensus on these issues. That doesn't mean that there's going to be consensus on everything, though. And when that happens, we need to accept there's going to be multiple perspectives and just respect those and not get bogged down in them. Strive for full participation and share time with others, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate, that no one person is dominating the conversation. As facilitators, we'll be jumping in throughout the process with questions to bring other people in and keep the conversation moving. And then finally, just be comfortable. I know sitting in front of a webcam for multiple hours is not always the most comfortable thing, but we just want you to feel able to, go and get a drink of water if you need it, have your coffee, do whatever you need to just relax and be able to fully participate. So that's just our initial list. Are there any questions about those? Any modifications or additions y'all would like to make? Overall, does it seem like a good list? Thumbs up?
Yeah, maybe this is a good time we could discuss, Zach, if you all prefer to use the preset, thumbs up, or if you just want to physically, in your screen do a thumbs up, and likewise with raised hands.
Yeah, so we have the buttons down there in WebEx if you would like to use those. That might be an easier way to just keep track of it as we go. So okay.
And then Todd, do you have a hand up?
Yeah,
I do. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I've been trained in the few weeks I'm with folks to use the electronic stuff, and I'll totally defer to what everyone wants. But given that we're talking, I suspect somewhat informally tonight and tomorrow, I would feel quite comfortable with people just kind of going like this, if that's okay. So we're not all fumbling to try to click electronic buttons if y'all are comfortable with that. And one thing I just wanted to share with folks real quick, I feel compelled to do this because as a teacher, I'm always wondering what my kids are up to when I'm looking at their little squares. I just want you all to know when you see me turned this way and it looks like I'm working on another computer and you think I'm distracted, I'm not distracted. I am working on another computer because I'm taking notes. So when you see me look away and it look like I'm working, I'm actually keeping track of stuff because I forget stuff easily. So just wanted to let you know what I'm all up to. I'm not multitasking.
Yeah, excellent. And we'll be also taking notes. So if you see us just the top of our head, that's what we're doing as well. And maybe too, I know you all are fluent with WebEx, but if you take a second just to play around with the view, see if you want a grid view, if it bothers you to see your own image, if it's distracting, there's a way to minimize that too. So just play around a little bit to make sure that this is the right, interface. But as we go back to community agreements, I know in previous council goal setting process, this part of the discussion was a little bit more lengthy as the previous council was developing sort of relational norms for how to discuss conflict, how to relate to each other. It sounds like you all thus far have worked relatively conflict-free, but I wonder if you those of you who have experienced, conflict in these sort of settings, if you could maybe draw from that experience, what are some agreements or some things that have been helpful for setting some ground rules?
Do you want us to just chime in?
Yeah.
How about giving people the benefit of the doubt? I don't know what if there's a formal name for that, if there's a jargon for that.
No, I like it. The more plain language, the better.
Also, I'd say not talking over each other.
And then maybe, in your previous setting, Mayor Walters, was there anything that came out of that discussion that made an impact, or sort of you felt like sort of carried you through in further discussions?
I think to me one of the most important, well, they're all important, but where it says make space for multiple perspectives, I think is very important. Sometimes, people are very passionate about what their goals are and making sure that there's space for everyone to share and be heard and be a part of the discussion is essential. So I would just appreciate keeping a focus on that as well. So thank you.
And then I know, Bill, you've been through this process previously too. Is there anything that sort of stood out of earlier discussions that made an impact? Are you going to pull forward for this?
I think we've gotten most of them on the board currently. I think the most important thing is being respectful and honest and understanding that other people have opinions, and we need to be facilitators of opinions, not just the owner of our own opinion. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, Todd.
Thank you. I wanted to emphasize the second one as well, speaking honestly and with respect, because part of my frustration in working in any group is when I learn later or informally that somebody wasn't comfortable with something, but they didn't bring it up at the time in the group. And my personal style, and I hope others are comfortable with this as well, that if I don't agree with what's being said, I will make that known. And I'll do it in the most thoughtful tone and manner and language I can. But I do not believe that we can get better if people aren't willing to share their disagreement. And so I can't emphasize that enough. I don't take things personally. I work from what Mary just said about giving people the benefit of the doubt. I never assume that when someone's coming after me or attacking me, I just assume they're giving a different perspective that I ought to weigh in and listen to. And I hope that we'll all feel very comfortable not getting caught up in the consensus train and being able to say, I'm not there yet. And I know what I've had to teach myself as a teacher is when a potential agreement comes up, to really give time to pause and to not say to the group, everybody good with this? Great. Okay, let's go. And to really stop and really give people some time to process and chew and think and decide whether they are and are not, and create a space where they're comfortable disagreeing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an important perspective. And the next thing I want to discuss with you is about consensus, but I don't want to move off our topic of community agreements if there are any other thoughts or lingering issues or anything that came up before we jump from this discussion. Okay, so we're in agreement. The other issue we want to talk to you all about is, as we do the goal setting, our sort of best example would be if we can come up with goals that are all consensus based. As you come up with the goal, we'll ask everyone to vote, and then if it's unanimous, then it goes on the board. However, if it's not, if there is a disagreement, it is a pretty quick process. So our initial thought is if we have some goals that don't reach consensus, we can give some space for discussion, and then we'll have to move on if we can't then reach consensus about it, and put it in what we're calling a parking lot for sort of, if we have time at the end, or if you want to have another meeting to sort of flesh out those places where there is a point of disagreement. But I want to see for you if that's a procedure that makes sense, or if you think it's much more important, if we're hitting a space of disagreement, to really just stay there until we have some movement, or if a sort of procedure where we put things in a parking lot for later works for you. So just first thoughts on that. Or if we think more broadly, the issue of consensus and goal building. Okay, I want thumbs up for Todd. Thumbs up. Okay, sounds good. So we'll just do the same procedure after we have a discussion about the particular goal. We'll have a discussion, let you all vote, and then we'll put it on the sticky note. And if it doesn't make it to the yellow sticky note, it'll go into the parking lot. Great. Then next on our agenda, we're a little bit ahead of time, which is awesome because now we have a little bit of extra time to discuss an equity framework. And so coming into this work, we were trying to find any documents or any mission statements that address the issue of equity specifically in West Linn. And so it sounds like you all are in the process of embarking on a more concerted effort to articulate what your equity goals are and then implement those into the city. But we want to help start that process too and start that discussion so that it makes it into this goal setting discussion. So I know we have a slide, I think, Zach, if you don't mind sharing it. Okay, so this is our sort of an example of an equity framework that's based in community engagement. That is sort of our world, and as city council members, you are also engaging with the public, and so that seemed like the right frame for this kind of equity work. But as we engage in it, you can see it's a multi-step process, and the first step is really just to assess your organization's current equity goals and commitments. And so if we start with an organizational overview, we thought we could have a discussion in this space about the current strengths in the city, what are potential gaps in equity, and then what are possible action areas that we would want to concentrate on as we look at the goals. And then finally, what I would love out of this discussion is to come up with a list of questions that we might ask ourselves or checks that we might ask ourselves as we're going through the goals to see, are we, meeting our equity considerations? Are we thinking about the folks that we need to be thinking about as we're doing this goal setting? And if so, if we could really articulate, how we might measure success in these instances. So it's a pretty broad question, but I wonder if, especially, folks who have been with the council for a while, if you want to sort of start us off to say where are our strengths in articulating equity in West Linn? What's currently working, or where do you look for an articulation of equity in the city? Bill?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the strength in West Linn is that we have a lot of people who are professionals, well-educated, that understand what equity is about and want to see effective change. I think one of the gaps, though, is that we have a hard time understanding what we need to do to fill that gap. So if we take a look at equity through a race lens, and we take a look at our demographics in the city, and we say, well, how many people of various different ethnicities do we have living in the city? And is that the lens that we then need to apply to how many people of that ethnicity do we actually have working for the city or contracting with the city? And so how close are we to filling that gap? So there's a lot of different ways to look at ethnicity and equity. And I don't think we fully understand even what our measurement should be. So we can have a lot of people that understand the issues, but if we don't have a perspective on what the goal should be, we're never going to be able to fill that gap.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. And actually, maybe I should take a step backwards. And I appreciated before this meeting, Todd, I know you had some questions about how are we defining, as we were using some of these terms, how are we actually defining them? So maybe I should take a step back before this discussion, although not to negate any comments, but I think you really hit both a strength and a gap. But maybe we should define equity in West Linn. Right.
I was just reading the definition in your email of the fair and just consideration of all people in West Linn, and what I think about when I hear that is definitely in the past and even at present when we have council meetings, we don't have very many people that come and show up and testify, and making sure that the goals that we set and the things that we do are representative of everybody and not just those who show up is something that's important to me, because the vast majority of people in town don't have the time to come and testify. So that's one of the ways I'm going to be looking at equity is what I'm doing, something that I think the people who aren't at the meeting would be willing to support or would favor. So that's one of my perspectives on it. I thought I'd share. Thanks.
Yeah, and I feel like that reaches it, something that's measurable, who's showing up at council members, and then also starts us in that question of, who's not in the room is a great equity question to be asking any of these goals.
I would add that, I'm very excited that we have a group, the Kinley Group, helping us with our equity audit for the city currently, and we should be getting some results from that shortly. I wish it was before this goal setting, but it's fine because I think it'll, everything will line up just fine as far as scheduling. And I think that once we get the data from that audit, we can really look at creating an equity plan for the city. That will be really important work to me. And I'm sure to others, it always, one thing that I think we hear a lot is well, the people at the bottom of the hill and the people at the top of the hill. And, there's a lot of, people using language that pits different parts of the community against each other when I don't know that that's, it's not something that I experience. But I know that, for some people it is their experience. So I want to be intentional about understanding how everyone feels, but also figuring out ways that we can plan to, eliminate those gaps and make the city more equitable in all of its different systems.
Yeah, and maybe as part of this definition, we think about, who is not represented in West Linn, who are the groups that you believe, are not showing up at council or not involved in decision making. And if we can articulate, who those folks are, then we can start to build some measurable goals for increasing the participation.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I would add is the importance. I was trying to think of how to even word this. The critical importance and responsibility of us as privileged and generationally privileged people to do the work that it will take to find out who those people are and what they're experiencing due to the impacts of generational systemic discrimination and oppressive systems that have excluded people from conversations, and even knowing or even being able to begin to conceive of how to participate in conversations that they just don't feel like are meant to include them and their needs. And that's what I consider to be equity, making access and space, and not just opening up a door and then waiting for them to walk through it, but finding them and meeting them where they are.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it seems like there's resonance to, you know, how do you reach people? How do you get them involved in these discussions? So I wonder, do you all have some mechanisms that you already use that we might sort of build on? Todd?
And to clarify, when you say mechanisms to build on, do you mean mechanisms for intentionally getting more people engaged in the city? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess if we take this as our first example of, you know, an equity goal would be getting folks that are underrepresented involved in decision making or involved in the council's business. So what are the ways that you've used in the past, or the mechanisms that we can brainstorm now for trying to accomplish that? You know, what are some of the measurable things?
To clarify, based on what you just said, is that where you're trying to take us then, for us to establish what you just called equity goals? Is that what we're working toward right now? Because I wasn't clear on that.
Oh, yeah. So I think in this discussion, we're thinking more broadly about equity goals, but it's really to start the process, because I hear this equity audit is coming. You'll be doing a longer and more systematic process, thinking specifically about equity. But we want to make sure in this process that we're all kind of thinking of the same things when we talk about equity. We're thinking expansively, and that we're thinking about the ways in which we might incorporate equity goals into any other kind of goal setting discussion that we might have. And so I wondered if you already have things that you consider equitable ways of accomplishing your goals, that we would make sure to elevate those as we're discussing about any other goal.
Well, we do have neighborhood associations and citizen advisory groups, and we also have community centers. So for instance, the Robinwood Station and the Adult Community Center and a few other amenities that we use to try and engage with the community. And I know that city staff as well as independent groups are involved in a lot of those different groups, but we don't really have other than through our liaisonship role, which we serve as a member of council. I don't think we really have a formal process that I'm aware of with engaging with those groups, other than perhaps an annual kind of a report from the neighborhood associations that comes to the city council once a year and says, here's what we've accomplished. Or we may occasionally have every 6 months a meeting with the neighborhood association president. But I think one of the reasons that we really liked Mr. Gabrielatos when we were recruiting for the city manager position, um, at least from my perspective, is he had these community engagement skills, and he was willing to go out and have coffee with the community. And I think Mayor Walters has that coffee, although COVID has restricted us by and large from being effective in participating in those kind of activities. But those kind of activities in the past have been a great outreach effort where the council members spend a couple hours once a week at a local coffee shop and let people know they're there, so they can come and talk to a council member directly if there's something that needs to be brought to our attention that's not being placed before the council on a regular basis, either by the mayor or the city manager. So having that ability to address the city manager and the mayor and understand what is going on the agenda for the council meetings, I think is vital to us having equity through a larger lens of the community engagement process.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Mary?
Thank you. I was just going to also add that I had thought about neighborhood associations right before Bill said that. So definitely those are important, because I have observed a lot of community engagement happening through neighborhood associations, and anything we can do to encourage that kind of localized connections among the community, I think are really important. I was also going to mention that there are a couple of groups, West Linn Alliance for Inclusive Communities, and there's specifically a group focused on policing concerns. And I believe they're now called West Linn Community for Police Reform. And they've been doing and Building Bridges is another group that I know hosted a dinner, or they participated in a dinner that was specifically to invite BIPOC community members to come and have a meal with law enforcement professionals and to kind of break down some of the barriers and communicate. But I think groups like that, and if the council could somehow, and I'm not really sure what this would look like, reinforce that work, or maybe have individual council people who are interested in that work strengthen and facilitate those kind of connections. And COVID has certainly inhibited a lot of this outreach, but we just need to work around that, I guess, for a little while longer, at least. Hopefully not for too much longer. Thank you.
Yeah, Todd.
Thank you. I don't have a good grip right now on the question you posed to us a few minutes ago, Jen, when you said, do we now have equitable ways to establish our goals? Because I don't have a clear sense in my head of what equity means from a civic perspective. Now, from an education perspective, we've been training ourselves for the past 5 years and what that means. I'm very comfortable with it in an educational setting. Equity means ensuring that not every student is treated equal, but every student is getting what they need to be successful. So having that clear knowledge of what equity means in the school level makes it easier for me to act. I'm in a fog right now with your strengths, gaps, and possible action areas question because I don't know what equity means on a civic level. That said, two other things that I'd like to share. One is I do have a sense of what I think a gap of ours is. I don't know if you're ready for gaps or not.
Yeah, if you're ready to tell me, we'll write it down.
But, and for all I know, I'm embarrassed to say maybe this exists and I don't even know, but I've had the opportunity to work with other organizations that have an equity lens. And I know that a lot of organizations have created those, but didn't really utilize them. But I've had the opportunity to work with an organization that actually created one and did utilize it. And really what it meant to us in that particular agency was that we have created this sense of principle, this set of principles that we're all going to adhere to and abide by. And what we attempted to do is every time we took an action as a body, we tried to look at it through our equity lens. In other words, it was almost like a series of questions that we would ask ourselves. Every time it's decision-making time, we would go back to that equity lens list and say, how does this impact people of traditionally underrepresented or underserved communities and things like that, and et cetera, and et cetera. And it was effective because it forced us with everything we do to stop and think about what's the potential impact of this decision, not just our general sense for the community, but for particular populations. So I would put that, if it doesn't exist, forgive me if it doesn't, I'm not aware yet, but if that does not exist for the city, if we're willing to create it and then authentically use it with intention, I think it has the potential to be of great value to us. The only other thing I'll add is I've been trying to make sense of the visual that you have on the slide right now, and I have no idea what that visual has to do with our current conversation.
So this, let me make it a little bigger on my screen too. So this is one way in which you would do an equity framework. And Todd, using the language of an equity lens, I think is maybe even more useful in this discussion as you've applied it, because all we're trying to develop at this stage is just, as you say, what's the current definition of equity in West Linn? What's the current state? What's going on that is working? What are the gaps? And then what are the questions that we would come up for ourselves, so that as you're proposing a goal, we would do just that, of ask, who would be most impacted by this? who may be left out of this discussion. Whatever the questions that we will now spend the next hour developing will be the questions that we'll use. Not only as you develop goals, we want to make sure we have some measurable action and outcomes. We want to make sure that we're filtering everything through this equity lens. Bill, I see your hands up.
Sorry, Jen, was it off to me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I wanted to touch, if I could, just on one potential action area that I think is really exciting. So we've opened up the door for a discussion with a coalition group in the waterfront area, and it includes the Grand Ronde tribe. And so we have this great opportunity to utilize the old City Hall, old police department building, and create a community center that recognizes the historical importance of the Willamette Falls and the traditional utilization of that area through the tribes. So I believe help support our interest in understanding that we live on land that was stolen from the native people who inhabited this area. And so it's our opportunity to give back in a way that I don't think has been identified or utilized before. And I think it could really be used to showcase in our mission and our goals what we're trying to accomplish when we say, what are we doing to recognize and do something to shore up that gap that has been missing for so many years, that I think Ms. Baumgartner spoke to when she talked about gentrification and privileged white people. She didn't necessarily use the word white, but privileged people versus those that have been subjected to harsh reality of a scale of economies that doesn't always give them the same opportunity.
Okay, so this is helpful. So we're hearing a couple different types of equity questions that we might ask. One maybe being how are we supporting, both our current Indigenous community as well as historic communities in Westland. Another one, is how are we making sure that people of all economic levels are being included in the discussion? So how else, what are some of the other sort of equity concerns you have, or maybe if we just stick with gaps, maybe that's productive, that way we can get a list going of, what are the issues that we need to be really looking at for the next goal setting? Alternately, if we want to take another step back again and then reframe, what is our definition of equity moving forward? Do you feel like that's an important discussion, or do you want to move forward with a real broad sort of definition of equity and really get into the gaps? Or maybe it should say, do you feel like we all have a shared definition of equity at this point, or is that where we should sort of start our discussion?
Todd, did you get your question answered?
Well, I asked a couple. Do you mean the one about the visual or?
No, about the equity definition that we're working from right now.
No, that's what I was about to say. Thank you very
Okay.
much, Mary. I appreciate you flagging that. Jen, you just asked, do we think we're all working from the same definition? My answer is, I don't know until we all talk and share if we're all working from the same definition. But I don't know if others feel the same way, but for me, I hope that we can establish not a West Linn definition of equity. I hope there's a larger, more global definition of it that we can plug into. But I want to make sure we all know what that is, because as I just shared, I don't at a civic level.
I think West Linn too has some special challenges that are really important that kind of came into my mind, and they're never far from my mind because I've seen so many examples of this, which is the perception of West Linn as being a wealthy community makes it even more challenging for those who are not wealthy, because they face, food insecurity, for instance, as an example, and it's much harder for them to potentially be served. I, working in schools, would hear some really unfortunate things said to students, not intentionally to be unkind, but a student talked about being concerned about not being able to afford some materials for an assignment. And a teacher actually said, well, you live in West Linn, come on, you can afford this. And those kind of, just little microaggressions, micro invalidations that happen to people because they live in West Linn. And so, Todd, I do appreciate you saying, there needs to be a more broad, definition of equity, but also I think it's at the same time important to recognize the specific needs of people in West Linn who, if they are needing more services, are denied them because they're in a wealthy area.
Okay, so maybe we can workshop an equity definition that is broad enough that it would encompass everyone, but also, maybe we can think about some language that is sort of specific to West Linn. So maybe if we can, I'm trying to remember what I sent a really broad definition of equity, but maybe if I can put you on the spot, Todd, and see if you can start us rolling, give us the start of a definition, Zach's going to take notes, and then we're each going to contribute to that discussion, or you can pass and say that captured all of my thoughts.
No, I will do that. I will do that. Thank you. But I want to defer to Jules because she's got her electronic hand up.
Oh, thank you for seeing that. I just had my cursor over it. Thank you.
Okay, it's hard to do all this on Zoom. I think the definition you sent over was the one that Rory shared earlier, which is fair and just consideration of all community members of West Linn. And I would just add to that, I think that's a good definition. I think we could add the word empathy in there. I think that's key to being equitable, is to be able to empathize with others, in the place that they are and who they are, and what what barriers may exist. So as we lead, we can make sure that we're including everyone.
That's great. And that kind of gets at, Todd, your point that this is, as you're developing an equity statement, this is one that's for civic life, and so you're right, getting at leading with empathy and considering the barriers as two additional points.
All right, I'll throw one out. And this stems from stuff that I was exposed to many years ago, way back in the 1970s, the sociologist Glasser, when he talked about the four things that all human beings need. He talked about fun and love and power and belonging. And without getting into the details of what that was all about, I'll throw this out as a potential civic definition of equity, if you will. And that is that all feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah, that one I find really resonant. Does that resonate for you all too? A sense of belonging as part of equity?
That was amazing, Todd. I don't think I can improve on that.
Okay, so we have fair and just consideration. We have empathy. We have considering the barriers. We have a sense of belonging. What else do you think we should include in our definition of equity for West Linn?
I don't know if this should be in the definition, but one thing that I think is really key is that everybody feels invested in our community, that they feel like they have, you know, that they're empowered and welcome and, you know, to participate and invest in building the best community we can for everyone.
And then Roy, I see your hand is up too.
Yeah, I was just thinking about from a governing perspective, like making sure that we always consider the consequences of our decisions to make sure that the things that we do don't have unintended consequences for specific groups. So making sure that's part of the lens is something that I was thinking about. Thanks.
Yeah, that's really important. Can you say that, like, if say it again? I'm trying to just take notes of how to capture that, because that is a really important idea.
Oh, just kind of making sure that when we're making a decision or enacting a policy, or in this instance, setting a goal, trying to consider the consequences of what we do to make sure that there's no kind of unintended impacts on specific groups or people. Negative impacts, I would just make it more specific.
Okay, great. And then I think I saw Bill and then Mary.
Yeah, thank you. So I would include freedom from bias or favoritism. So we need to have a standard, not just formulated by structured law, but open to everybody, whether they be part of the LGBTQ plus community, whether they be Democrat or Republican. Everybody's point of view should be heard at the table, and everybody's point of view should be appreciated.
And then Mary, you have your hands up.
Thank you. I was going to add, I liked what Rory said, the unintended impact or unintended consequences, but I also think I like the word, the phrase disproportionate impact, or I was thinking as an example of tolling, and it's being discussed a lot right now because it's mostly I'm paying attention to the way ODOT has framed it, as they want to make sure tolling is seen through or equitable. And I just thought to myself, well, it inherently can't be, because people who can't afford it will be impacted disproportionately. There's no way to avoid it. There's no way to do it equitably, in other words. So anyway, disproportionate impact is what I like to include.
Yeah, does that feel like an appropriate capture for everyone else too? Or is that thumbs up? Yeah, that's great. Is there anything that we're missing from this definition or this list? One thing I like to think about is that, you know, not just intra-generational equity, but intergenerational equity too. Is, I know a lot of you have a sustained interest, or you have an interest in sustainability. So is that conversation in part of your definition of equity too? Or does anyone have a strong sense of how to maybe articulate that? No? Yeah.
I think that we can have some wording around our legacy, you know, that we're creating for future generations. But I'm not sure exactly how to word that. Maybe someone else has an idea.
Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, I'm gonna slaughter it, but it's an Iroquois quote. Consider the impact of every decision on 7 generations from now.
Okay, how does that land with everyone else? Sorry, the sun keeps getting right in my face. Here we go. Does that formulation work, or is there another way that you want to sort of word that, thinking about equity generationally?
I would just add that, you know, if we're going to turn the tide on the environmental disaster and the issues that face us globally from global warming and global extinction, then we really need to face the reality that decisions need to be made that favor environmental concerns over capitalistic concerns. So we need something to turn the wheel in the opposite direction. And I think that what Councillor Jones mentioned addresses that. I'm not sure that everybody would come away with that understanding from that, if you will, that paraphrase. So, yeah. So how do we incorporate that into our discussion?
Yeah, I think it's a good to have in here in definitions of equity, but I think you're right. I'm getting the sense we're not quite have landed on exactly how to articulate that. So I wonder, is there anyone else who wants to sort of make a pass at how we might inscribe this into our equity definition? Or do we keep it just really general, saying, you know, to consider the impact to future generations, or consider the climate impact? Is there some language that way that feels general enough?
The general works for me.
Okay, so we can, you know, again, this will be a living definition and part of this document that you will have the chance to revisit. So I think if we've captured the different components to equity, Todd?
Thank you. I'm sorry. If we're done with that one, I just want to clarify something real quick. The initial statement we worked from, fair and just consideration of all people in West Linn, what was the origin of that one? Where did that come from?
That one was just our general working definition for equity is fair and just. I think we have another, if you don't mind, another slide, Zach. And you all have seen this before, but you know, when we talk about equity, we make sure that it includes a definition of justice too, that we're thinking, you know, really broadly and holistically about what are the barriers, you know, and how can we think in a liberatory or justice oriented way as we're talking about equity. And so this is just a, you know, example I like because it's one that's evolved. It used to be if you all have seen this before, it used to be how you define equity versus equality. And in this one, we want to work in that definition of justice.
I've heard it mentioned too on this graphic that for true justice and equity, there would be no fence at all, chain link or otherwise. So
I agree. I prefer the graphic where the fence is gone, but this was the clearest one. But we can just erase that fence. I agree.
As far as the generational equity, how about somehow framing it in using the word planning? or policy somehow. Anyone want to help me out here? I guess that indicates the future by the actions of today.
One thing I just looked up was climate equity. And there was a definition from UCLA's Luskin Center for Innovation that says environmental equity means both protection from environmental hazards as well as access to environmental benefits for all, regardless of income, race, and other characteristics. I don't know if that's what we're looking for, or if it's too broad.
Actually, for me, it's a bit narrow.
For climate.
Oh, I didn't know you were speaking exclusively to climate. I thought you were throwing that out for a more general concept of equity.
Yeah, no, I was throwing it out for climate, but then we were sort of bouncing back and forth between generational and then climate action. So I don't know, like that was the definition of climate equity, environmental equity. I'm not sure if we want to broaden that to meet the goal of defining generational equity.
I guess the question I would pose to our facilitator is, are we endeavoring to define subsets of equity, or are we just defining equity?
That's up to you. I mean, I think we were just trying to run through the different components of an equity statement, so we can, we can be really general, or we can really get into, because you have already articulated some of the specific parts of an equity statement, like a sense of belonging, creating a legacy, freedom from bias, considering the impact of future generations. It's a lot of different components. But maybe, I don't know, Zach, you're a better note taker than I am, so I can read my notes, but it may be more generative to kind of hear how you have captured some of this, not to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'll put them on a slide and put them up so people can read.
Oh, Rory, if you're speaking, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I wasn't. Someone opened my door and I said,
Oh,
in goal setting. Thanks.
great. So if we can get sort of a working definition of equity, then maybe we can shift, in our next 30 minutes of really just talking about those. We can maybe either talk about gaps and talk about measures, or we can just kind of stay here on what are the gaps that we see in West Linn currently, and what are the issues that we would like to address through the goal setting that are equity specific. And I do appreciate, I know you all are engaging in a much longer process. So, we just want to make sure that we heard from you in our pre-retreat interviews that equity is an important issue, to your goal setting, and something that's come up in recent events. And so we want to make sure that we're really being attentive to that. Bill, I see your hands up.
Yeah, Jen, are we going to also talk about diversity and inclusivity along with equity? But I think it's kind of hard to have a discussion about equity unless we add those other two areas to the mix. So, I know we've talked a lot about equity right now, but perhaps it will help us reach a definition of equity if we start talking about diversity, inclusivity, and then circle back to equity and say, okay, well, what are we doing to create that full package, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great point. So you would like to include language about diversity and inclusion within a definition of equity and make sure that that's part of it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think those are very vital aspects of our goal or our mission. You know, what are we trying to do when we say we want to be to have an increase in either natural law or man-made law, and what are our scales of balance? And diversity and inclusivity are a big part of that discussion around equity.
Yeah, how does that land for everyone else? Does that feel like that's an important part of this definition to you? Got thumbs up? Or any other thoughts about that or disagreement that that's part of this definition? Okay, so maybe we can just take a second look, the notes that Zach has captured in our equity discussion. Does that, maybe I'll just give you a second to read and then we can talk if that sort of captured what our working definition will be and what we might add. Todd?
For the fourth bullet, the one that I had thrown out, if Zach will do this, please, I actually would prefer it be in the language that I offered. Because the term create assumes that we're going to create that sense of belonging, which is not the point I want to make. What I want to say is all feel a sense of belonging. Thank you, Zach.
No problem.
Todd?
I'm not saying this to suggest an elimination. I'm only making an observation, but it seems to me there's a nice complement between the first bullet and the sixth bullet. You know, you started this with this one that says ensuring fair and just consideration of all people. And I see a nice complement to it in the one that Rory and Mary talked about when considering all consequences and avoiding unintended negative disproportionate impacts. In a sense, it's asking us to operate with an equity lens.
Mm-hmm. Mary, did you have a thought? I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna also maybe even suggest bullet point 8 could also somehow be folded into 1 and 6. Because they are kind of related. I feel like that's related too.
Mary, I agree. May I propose something?
Yes.
We could simply say, if you're comfortable with this, ensuring fair and just consideration. Actually, no, I'm going to go to the sixth one. I'm sorry. Considering all consequences and avoided unintended negative impacts on the people of West Linn now and in the future.
Yeah, that's great. You all are doing a really good job stitching these together into sort of a holistic statement. Bill, I see your hand is up. I don't know if it was from earlier or if you have something you'd like to add now.
No, I'm good. I'm sorry. I must have left my hand up.
And Todd?
I simply want to ask whether the change we made to the third bullet, does that make people comfortable with eliminating the second? It does me.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't see everyone's faces while I'm sharing. Is that a yes?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay. I'm only seeing like 4 people at a time. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. And then there was some talk about that overlapping with the first one too. Do we think that that one stays as a separate line item?
And it's, if we don't know yet, again, that's why this is a living, we're just trying to get a working definition and make sure that we're thinking everything. So this is sort of step one, brainstorming. So if it's helpful for us to start to stitch these together, I think the more defined we can get, the better. But if we're a little bit stuck, then that's okay. We can still move on, I think, and feel like we've captured everything. Does that feel okay for everybody?
I feel like this represents a good equity framework for our goal setting. If we consider these points as kind of the guiding principles, I feel good about it.
Okay, so before I don't want to leave this if everyone is still thinking or if we want to add to it, but otherwise, maybe in the last bit of time we have, we can sort of workshop some of our equity questions that we would use for our framework. To feel okay to move on? Oh, yes, Mayor Walters?
I'm wondering if we should use some more intentional language about making anti-racist decisions and you know, I don't know what the verb would be, but talk about systemic racism and discrimination and actively working to dismantle those structures.
Sorry, what was your verb there? Actively work to, did you say dismantle?
Dismantle systems of discrimination and racism. I think it would just be the word system would be in there. So systemic discrimination and racism or systems of discrimination and racism.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's a real direct acknowledgement of what it is that what's at issue. Does everyone feel comfortable with that language? Is there anything else in that sort of the realm of systemic problems or any other language that we might use that's direct to groups that are impacted? Todd?
Just to clarify, this working definition we're coming up with, is this for our internal use or is this something that's going to be publicized?
Our thought was just a working definition for this group, for this goal setting. Because again, I know you all are embarking on a bigger process. And so we don't, we're not trying to upend that or color that process too much. We just want to make sure that we're, all working from the same definition and that definition is important to this goal setting. Does that feel comfortable?
I only asked because if this is for our internal uses to guide our thinking tomorrow, I'm great with it. If it's going to be for public consumption, I think it needs wordsmithing. That's all.
Yeah. Mary?
I wanted to see if Jules would be okay with, and what other people think about adding to this last bullet item, somehow to seek input from BIPOC people or, people impacted by this systemic racism and discrimination. So it's not just coming from our perspective. I don't know exactly how to word that. Actively work with impacted people to dismantle. But if it needs to be a different bullet item, I'm just kind of thinking, I'm reading through this thinking these are kind of action items for basically people of privilege. So I want to make sure that we are including voices of it with different lived experiences that we're talking about wanting to make changes to improve, but we need to maybe actually be talking to them, not just about them or hearing from them.
Yeah, that's an important point. So does the language, the ways that sort of captured what you said, does that feel good? And I'm sorry, I think we lost you on a tech issue, Mayor Walters, but Mary was just articulating.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Sorry. I was trying to answer Mary's question like 10 times, but my internet was not working properly. Yeah, I think that's an important point. I would say the bullet point that says hearing everyone's views, I would say especially those who are marginalized or I would add that language to that one because what I think we can actively work to dismantle systemic discrimination and racism without expecting that the people impacted need to do that for us. I think that's our job. So I think hearing from those people is important and working with them, but I don't want it to sound like we're putting the onus on them for that to happen.
No, you're right. Good point.
Does that feel like we captured everything, or does anyone have some lingering thoughts or wordsmithing that we want to do any further with this?
So maybe just go back to the bottom, highlighted, and say actively work to dismantle systemic discrimination and racism, or racism and discrimination, either one. That's okay with everyone.
Okay. So if we feel pretty good that this at least we're all working with the same ideas, and when we talk about equity, then I think maybe we can sort of workshop some of the questions that we might ask ourselves as you're developing goals. If we're starting this equity lens, what kind of checks or what kind of questions do we need to be asking? And I think, Mary, you earlier said, you know, who's not in the room. I think that maybe that was your question earlier. And I think that's maybe a generative place to start. Todd?
So I wanted to pause, give Mary a chance to respond if she wanted to.
Oh, you cut out. I didn't hear that. Sorry. Jen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you all able to hear me okay now?
Yes, I can now.
Oh, great. Okay, so I was saying, I think earlier when you were articulating questions about equity, you said, you know, who's not in the room. So maybe that's one question that we might want to discuss. Who is not in this decision-making process?
Yes. I don't know how to frame that as a question, but I guess it's part of this work of that Mayor Walters was just pointing out, the hearing everyone's views, but the fact that there are people we need to hear from who've been excluded from the conversation for so long that I'm not sure. I mean, they don't view themselves as even welcome to share what they think. I think, or expect that it's going to be listened to. And I don't know how to frame that really as a question.
I think that's like welcome is a really good word though. Like how are you welcoming people who have not been in the decision-making process?
Yeah, I like that.
And then Todd, did you have a response?
Well, I also like the way I thought I heard Mary say it initially. You know, she said, "I'm not sure how to put this as a question, but unless I misheard, I thought you did at the beginning, and it was good." When you said, "Who's not in the room?" I think that's an amazingly valuable question for us to continuously ask ourselves. And Jen, to go to the question you asked a moment ago, when you said, "What questions do we want to be asking ourselves along these lines?" My response is, I think a number of the bulleted statements we have in front of us right now could simply be converted into questions.
Yeah, that's true. If we switch them to how do we lead with empathy? How do we, you know, then they become generative questions. So I just thought maybe popcorn style, you all, you know, let's just keep generating a list and then we can kind of winnow down the questions that are, you know, the few questions that are maybe the ones that will apply to every goal. But if you all just want to keep brainstorming these questions. Or if you want, we can just go sort of one by one. If you want to, I can call on folks and you can just offer the question that's at the top of your mind.
Well, I'm not sure if there's one particular question that's coming out in my mind. I'm just basically kind of reframing these, like Todd pointed out, as questions, and that is working for me. I mean, but I don't have one particular one that's coming out above others.
No, that's helpful. Just re-articulate them as questions and we'll take notes and then we can look, you know, once we have this long list of like, what are the questions we're really going to focus on? So. So maybe it's helpful if we want to go, you know, one by one through this list and then articulate what is it that we're asking with this? Does that Is that fruitful? Sorry.
Jen, before we do, can I clarify what you're trying to get us to right now? What's the purpose of these questions that you're trying to work with us to generate?
So the purpose would be trying to identify a few key questions that, as you're setting a goal, like one of your goals might be to, engage more with neighborhood groups. And then if we have a few questions like, well, who's not in the room in neighborhood groups? What can we do to make people feel welcome in these neighborhood groups? So those kind of questions, they'll be our sort of third step in the goal setting process. We'll get the goals, we'll check out how are we going to measure these goals, and then we're going to ask ourselves, what is the equity part of this goal? How can we make this goal meet our equity goals, our broader equity goals? Does that sound like the process that you all want, or that's generative? Because we can pivot too. I wanted to make sure that we front load our equity discussion, but if questions are not generative to a goal setting discussion, then we can do it differently. But that was sort of our intention. Do you have any?
If I understand correctly, Jen, it sounds like you're trying to have us springboard from this list we have in front of us right now to a series of questions that we'll ask ourselves tomorrow as we're developing our goals. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
All right. So in a sense, I'll call this Equity Lens Light. Okay.
I don't love that, but yes. It is step one in an equity process, right? Because if we were just doing equity, this in and of itself would be a much bigger and longer conversation. So we're just trying to make sure that we're being attentive to it, and that we're starting you off on that process in a way that's going to be helpful. So yeah, it's not as deep a dive as you're going to do, but at least helps us maintain equity as something that's important to every part of this discussion. And so for me, it's generative to look at questions as an equity lens, but maybe if this is not resonating with you, we can think about how do we measure equity in goals? Maybe that's a more fruitful discussion.
For what it's worth, I like where you're taking us based on my clarification of where you were taking us just then. If we're going to try to agree on a series of questions we'll ask ourselves tomorrow as we develop our goals, that makes a lot of sense to me to do that. So I wouldn't abandon it yet.
And I'm okay with that too. I think that's a good idea. I think keeping the list like to a central few key questions, like 2 or 3 or something around there, so that we don't get too like overwhelmed with trying to ask ourselves 5 or 10 questions with each goal. So my recommendation would be figure out 2 or 3 questions we can ask ourselves pretty quickly to keep the process efficient. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly right. Yeah, because you're right. You wouldn't have this exhaustive list for every single goal. So yeah, that's I guess the question is what are our key? Let's try and find 3 key questions or 2 key questions. Mary?
I'm cheating just a little bit. I went on to Portland's equity page and I liked this. I'm rephrasing something they've got here, but how can we transform the historic power dynamic for accountable systemic change based on the principles of humanity, justice, and belonging? And people can change that or take things out. Please feel free. And maybe it's just that's it right there. I mean, period, a question mark.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, please do crib from other places or other ways you've encountered these questions and the way that municipalities handle them too.
I was just going to add to the first question there, who is not in the room and how would they respond or react, just to make that more definite and certain.
Todd?
I appreciate what Rory just said. I was looking at the first one as well, and I was thinking, who's not in the room and how do we learn from them?
Hmm. Okay, what else? At this point, we're still brainstorming, so we can have a much longer list than what we end up with. Is there a question maybe around the barriers? Todd?
I'm trying to temper myself, folks, because I always have ideas, but I don't want to talk too much. So I'll generally pause for a long time, and if no one chimes in, I will. So forgive me if I'm being obnoxious. But I really like the point that Mary and Rory made earlier, and I'd like to capture it as a question. Zach, it would be, what are the consequences of this action on all residents now and in the future?
I love that.
Mhm.
And the only other one I would add would be, will this, I had a great verb and I just lost it. Dang it. I'll park a word for now. Will this allow all residents to feel a sense of belonging? But allow is not the word I want, but I'll get there.
Mary?
I have just a little tweak to suggest. I've sometimes been concerned about words like citizen and resident because they have some potential complications. Sometimes I just use community member, partly because we also want to be a welcome community to people who don't actually live here. And when that it is another reason why to not just specify it's people living in West Linn, because, well, we all know why, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I do. Does anybody want me to expound on that?
Mary, that's a great point. Could we just say people?
Yeah. I mean, something broad.
Zach, can you fix it in the third bullet as well? Replace residents with people? Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
I know when you just in silence, but I want to give just a pause, make sure we don't have other questions that we might add to this list. Okay, if we're not thinking of any questions, oh, are you going, Todd?
In the fourth bullet, how do you all feel about replacing allow with enable?
Enable or provide, either one of those. And it, yeah, I think enable is fine. I mean, it's a tricky word, but I think it works there.
Mary?
Well, I feel like this conversation wouldn't be complete without the look back as well as the look forward. So, and I'm not exactly, I'll need help with this, but Bill brought it up, the aspect of our debt that we owe to the people who this land was the home of. And I don't know how to ask that.
Yeah, that's a really good question on how do you make a question around the history of who's been disproportionately impacted? Are you thinking really broadly historically, or are you thinking specifically like for Indigenous people?
I'm thinking of Indigenous people. This is especially true for the area we live in because it was such an important and historically known site. I mean, it's not just some, I mean, you know, there might be a field down in the Willamette Valley somewhere that was also important and it's just not documented in a way that we can verify, but this is highly verifiable and a currently important place to Indigenous people who've been displaced and in sometimes often ignored when they're asking. So I think it's important to somehow fit this in here, but I just don't know exactly how to do it.
Or maybe how can we acknowledge, or how, I mean, I guess it depends on what the
Yeah, how can we acknowledge? I like that. I mean, when you get into using words like debt and reparations or restoration, it can be tricky. So I want to be aware of, you know, what we're able to do.
So I'm noticing that we're sort of coming to the end of our time for this evening, and I don't want to truncate because I think you're bringing up a really good issue and a good question that I feel like we might work on a little bit more. But I also want to abide by our our agenda. So I wonder if we can just highlight that one, and then maybe as we bring the questions back, we can sort of think on it and workshop that one. Does that sound
Totally.
okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I think this gives us some starting questions, and then as we revisit this discussion in the specific goal setting, then we'll sort of revisit and then rearticulate the questions so that we all feel really comfortable with them. Does that sound okay? Okay, so I just, in this last minute, if we could just do, each of you just a second of any like last thoughts or any thoughts you want folks to be, sitting with for tomorrow, or any other questions that you have. And so maybe Mayor Walters, if I can start with you, just sort of last thoughts or anything for tomorrow.
And you can call me Jules. You don't have to call me Mayor Walters.
Okay.
I'm excited for tomorrow. I feel like this has set a good tone and platform for where we're going to start from. I'm excited to hear everyone's ideas and what focus they have on different issues. I really appreciate the way that we're able to work together respectfully. I really value that. So I think it's going to be great. I think tomorrow will be wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Bill? You're good. I like it short and sweet. Mary, do you have any thoughts about today or tomorrow?
I'm grateful and I'm excited.
So, I'm just listing people by the way that I show up on my grid. Todd?
I feel good about the set of questions to support us tomorrow, and I trust that Zach will regularly hit us over the head with it all day long.
I can guarantee that. Yeah.
No, only because it'll get easy to get caught up in our process and kind of forget what we did.
It's true. Yeah, we definitely want to have intentional check-ins with this throughout the day tomorrow. So.
Thank you. And please call me Todd. Thank you.
Rory?
I don't have any real thoughts. I've just been thinking this whole time about how we're all working together so well, and that hasn't always been the case for the Westland City Council, as many of us know. So I'm just glad to be with all of you and working so well together to really, I think the citizens will be proud of this because I think it's a really great accomplishment.
Yeah, I'm very impressed by the way you all piggyback off each other and work together. It feels good to be in this process with you. Jerry, do you have, so you've been silent this process as we've been discussing. I wonder if you have last thoughts or thoughts about tomorrow?
Oh, I think it's important for the council to do this. I think we've laid a good foundation, and I'm excited about tomorrow.
Great. Well, we're really excited to meet with you again tomorrow. I know we'll start the day tomorrow with public comment. I want to give a shout out, Todd. I saw that you did a little data analysis on the public comments, and we'll probably use that as our jumping off point of, you know, what comments you all have received so far, any comments that the public want to make in the morning. And then we'll shift to staff presentations, and then we'll really get into the meat and potatoes of this goal setting. Zach and I are around. If you have thoughts tonight, tomorrow morning, middle of the night, call us, email us. Todd?
Just a quick thing for Zach and Jen. In our agenda tomorrow, you have us set for a meeting at 10:30. I'm just letting you know I'm relying on that because I've got a personal obligation at that exact moment. So I just want you to be aware.
Okay.
I set my agenda around you, but I just want you to know I really will leave you at 10:30.
Deal. And we really do believe in breaks. It's important to take care of our bodies while we're doing this, and important just to turn the camera off for a little bit and give you a break. So yeah, we'll definitely honor that.
Oh, and I'm sorry, this is kind of dorky, but I just want to say this real quick. I'm going to tell you all right now that I have a habit I'm trying to break, but my wife and I are both divers, and as divers, we're taught to not go like this when we're underwater, because that means I need to go up. We're taught to go like this, meaning I'm okay. And I just want you all to know, if you see me doing this, okay, I'm not a white supremacist. I automatically do this, so just bear with me if it happens. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's that works. Awesome. Well, yeah, as you think about if there are other things like that, that's important for us to know too. Any tics on how you want to present your gestures or presentation, that's great for us to know. So I think unless you all have other thoughts, we're really pleased with everything that's happened so far and looking forward to talking with you in the morning. And I guess Jules, you I don't know if you officially close us.
I can, and I just want to say thank you to you and Zach for all your preparation, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. So thank you for your hard work, and thank you, Council and Jerry. And we will see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.